Welcome to another edition of the game. I'm Mark Simon.
And I'm Bob Marks.
Producer Frank Bravo was at the controls. In 2022, Christina Corpus was elected sheriff of San Mateo County, ousting incumbent Carlos Bolanos. It was a vote for change at a law enforcement department widely regarded as in need of reform and modernization. Less than 2 years later, accusations arose that Sheriff Corpus had lost the confidence of the rank and file deputies in her office, the sergeants, and even her command staff. A damning report by retired Judge Doris Cordell alleged that the office was rife with retaliation and intimidation. Over the next several months, the county supervisors put a measure on the ballot authorizing them to fire Corpus. The measure passed with 84% of the voters saying yes. More people voted in support of the measure than voted to elect the sheriff in 2022. Several weeks later, the board voted unanimously to fire the sheriff. She appealed that decision and testified at a 10-day quasi-judicial hearing that she was the victim of forces resistant to her efforts to reform the office. The retired judge who presided over the appeals hearing has until October 13 to issue his determination the county's case should be upheld. Then the board has another 30 days to accept or reject the judge's opinion. And meanwhile, District Attorney Steve Wagstaff has convened a civil grand jury that has the power to fire Corpus from office. The process, trial by jury, will commence later this year. The controversy has consumed the county, and particularly the lives of these two people who have joined us. We're joined by two members of the news media who have been following this controversy from the first day. Michelle Iracheta, editor of Redwood City Pulse, and Aenlle Mata, reporter of San Mateo Daily Journal. And Michelle has been overseeing her organization's coverage. Aenlle has been up to her neck in covering these things almost on a daily basis. Probably count on one hand the number of days when you didn't have to write about this. So thank you both for joining us. Aenlle, let me start with you. You were in the courtroom every day of that fairly dramatic 10-day hearing. You've been at many of the Board of Supervisors meetings. What has it been like to cover this story? Has it been difficult, challenging, stressful, weird? What's it been like?
It's been a case study in quality journalism, I hope. It's been very difficult, I would say, at least in the get-go, getting to know the ins and outs of the sheriff's office. I was pretty new to the job right when everything was unfolding publicly. Since then, like you said, it has been weekly, if not. There was a few months there where it was more so just once a month of a story, but it's almost every day now. And I'd say, I'm getting pretty used to the details at this point. I've become pretty well versed in everything that has to do with Sheriff Christina Corpus. But it's been very interesting and very difficult, I would say. But it gets easier every day.
What are the challenges? I mean, a lot of things people don't understand is that you have to repeat the same set of facts over and over and over again. And that just gets boring from a perspective of a writer. But what are the other challenges? Is it just a hard issue to stay on top of, or is there just so much going on? What's the challenge?
There's definitely so much going on. The details, I'm learning everything there is to know about what a sheriff's office really entails in the county, and what rank and file really means, and how day-to-day operations work in the sheriff's office, which was just something I was obviously unfamiliar with before this gig. But I'd say I'm pretty well versed in how these things go now. Just keeping track of everything. Every other day there's a new accusation and story, and so it's just keeping the details in order is pretty difficult sometimes.
Michelle, let me ask you, Redwood City Pulse is still a fairly new organization. You're fairly new to the community. I don't mean to diminish your experience, but compared to the 25 years the journal has been around, you have a chance to sort of bring a little bit of an outsider's perspective to this story. Give us your sense of the story as one that you've been plunged into, that your organization has had to cover.
I think what's interesting for me is coming in and seeing that a lot of folks had a lot of hope for Christina Corpus. And then we were kind of at the cusp of the end of Bolanos, and then coming in and seeing Corpus, and folks had lost interest or lost, the hope that they had in Bolanos. But then you see both the previous two sheriffs, and then you're like, okay, here comes Corpus, and she's going to change everything. And we see that coming in, and we're like, okay, we think the community has something going on. Let's see what happens. And this was back in her election in 2022. And when she won, we're watching as she's progressing through, and we're speaking and everything. And so from my perspective, I'm watching the community as they welcome her in. And then all of this is happening. And we're like, wait a minute. Is there something in the county within itself? Is there something happening within the sheriff's department that has created this entire, this environment? And so that's what we've been watching, and going to Anna's point of the challenges that this has presented. Reporting on this has so many layers. When you talk about coverage, you think of like, here comes a lawsuit. Now we're talking about the Board of Supervisors. Now you're talking about, Callagee is being, sued. And then, Sheriff Corpus has got something else going on over here. And so you're always having to jump on top of things every day. And it's got branches that are just never ending. And so I'm sure for Anna, it's difficult as a reporter. For me as an editor, it's like, okay, telling my reporters, all right, you've got this one, and then telling my other reporter, please take on this. But here's the context. So we've got this internal timeline that we're trying to keep updated. But how do you do that when there are so many, moving chess pieces, right? So that's kind of the.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. It's a story that's on the move, and you've got, it's a moving target, really, and you've got people on both sides or multiple sides. I know who are coming at you constantly. This has happened. It's an outrage, and they want to keep, particularly Corpus's critics want to keep the outrage boiling. So how do you make a judgment about, that may be interesting. It may be interesting or funny or weird, but it's not newsworthy. Michelle, how do you make that call?
Yeah, that's a great point.
We're not going to write about everything.
Right, that's a great point. That's something that we discuss internally. A lot of times it's like, oh, here's another. I mean, there was a moment when we had, this is probably back in October, September, when there was the lies, intimidation, secrecy, the report, the Cordell report. I mean, we could talk about that later, but when that dropped and there was press conferences like every other day, it was like, do we send a reporter out to this, the Corpus, press conference, the union press conference, the Board of Supervisors? Do we need to be at every single press conference, right? Do we need to go to the Board of Supervisors meeting that day? I mean, how much time? We're a small nonprofit, right? We've got, just a few reporters, and especially for the Pulse, we've got one person covering us. So we collaborate a lot with the Almanac, which has a few more, like I think like with 2 reporters. So we're kind of teaming up here. And so it's like, well, do we need to do that? And so we talk about this internally. Well, actually there's kind of a city council decision happening today. So do we need to send someone? I don't know that that's really that important. Let's rely on a wire, service to really pick that up. We just don't have the bandwidth for that. And so you're right, And
it's the same challenge for you that I know you're getting bombarded almost. I mean, there are people representing the Deputy Sheriff's Association who went through a stretch of time where I think they were determined to have a story about how angry they were at the sheriff every day. And not every story's a story.
Yeah, I was told pretty verbatim that that was kind of the intent of some of those groups. And the same thing on behalf of the sheriff, even. I think everyone's goal was to get their point of view across. And so, like, we had to balance a lot on, our job as journalists is to keep the public as informed as possible. But we did, personally, I tried to avoid some of the more sensational news stories that didn't have an effect on, like, the actual public. They tended to be a little bit more of the details, a little bit more of the gossip, which plays a role in this story overall, but it wasn't demanding of like individual stories. And so it was a big decision every day about what details to really focus on and what really impacts like readership. And I think there's such a demand from our readership to hear about Corpus every day. Frankly, I think they would love to see a headline every day, just to keep up to date with everything going on. But I mean, I cover other cities, I cover other things going on in the county. Like, it's definitely a balance.
Aenlle, let me ask you, as Mark mentioned, there were 10 days of hearings held. Let's focus a little bit on the hearings. What were the core arguments presented by both sides in the hearings?
Yeah. So the county's attorneys, or the attorneys representing on behalf of the county, their main arguments, they approached with 18 counts of violations of the county charter, I believe. A lot of it had to do with retaliation, an alleged affair or sort of dynamic between her and her former chief of staff, regardless of if that was romantic or not. A relationship that sort of placed the responsibility of the sheriff's office onto someone that a lot of people didn't feel deserved the responsibility. That was a core argument. Staff just feeling really berated and overworked. And Corpus's side believed that she made the argument that she was a reformer and people are resistant to change, which I think is a very solid argument to be made in any workplace environment. And that was kind of their crux of their argument, that she came into this kind of disheveled work environment and was trying to reform everything, and everyone was a little against that in the beginning. She is the first woman sheriff, or one of the first women in the state. She's the first woman in the county, woman and Latina in the county to be sheriff. And so that comes with its own background and context into every one of her day-to-day operations, I'd say. But and she inherited an office that was overworked and understaffed, and it was hard. And that was kind of their argument, was that it's been difficult to navigate, and there's been a lot of stress in that. A lot of the deputies are overworked. She argued it was about double overtime and a workforce that was a little emboldened to ask for more pay and complain when they didn't get it. So those were kind of the crux arguments, I'd say.
What was the atmosphere like in the room? Obviously, you've got a lot of people together, many of whom very strongly dislike each other. What was the atmosphere? Was there tension in the room?
It's a good question. I would say there was. I mean, the attorneys' teams were huge. Each side had at least 8 attorneys, if not more. I think the county's legal team was quite large. They had a lot of help from what I would assume are some peers and colleagues in the law firm that they hired. There was a lot of county employees, which I thought was interesting. It's obviously like their backyard, and so this is their day-to-day work lives, and it's hard, I would imagine, to navigate the county and working in the county right now without thinking about everything going on in the sheriff's office. So I think there was a lot of investment from the community. It was less attended than I expected, I will say. But I guess a lot of people have jobs to get to during the day. But I would say it was pretty intense.
Michelle, from your perspective, what were, as you read your reports and the other news media, what do you think were the most compelling arguments made by the county's attorneys in terms of why they thought Corpus should be removed?
I think it's just interesting how there were some of her biggest critics came in there, and there was just a lot of the things that we had heard in the beginning. The arguments changed. A lot of the the comments and things that were said about her were, you know, I think some of the timeline change. It was interesting to hear firsthand from the people who had made complaints about her, even her, and I like to say this, alleged boyfriend. It's one of my favorite things to say. I'm sorry. You know, it's just hearing her on stage, you know, after reading from what my reporter was saying or was writing, just hearing the things that she would say on the stand, you know, it's just, it feels like all of this is just coming to, you know, a head. And because you read all these reports and you see what they're saying, but then finally, like, hearing them say this on the stand and like seeing it in words from their perspective, you know, I think that was the most interesting part to me. And there was one time when I think she's claiming that, oh no, we're not in a relationship. But then you can see where somebody says, oh, but I could see him in the rearview mirror or something like that. And it's just interesting. Like, of course. Yeah. Anyways, that was my biggest takeaway.
Sheriff Corpus testified for almost 2 full days and then came back and testified again at the end. Clearly her argument was, I'm trying to reform this department. They're all picking on me. I even wrote in one of my columns I write for the same paper that Aenlle does, of course, that her argument was everybody else is lying. I'm the only one trying to fix this place. Is that a fair summation, do you think, Aenlle? And did she make that case? Or did she come off as sympathetic? I mean, seems to me there were times when she wanted to be tough and times when she wanted to be the victim. And I don't know if you can do both of those things at the same time.
I think that's a great point. I think that was something that I tried to really tap into and try to understand. I think hearing her speak is very interesting. I've followed this story for over a year now. And a lot of her arguments have remained consistent. So, I mean, in that regard, she is playing her case and has said it repeatedly. I think there's a lot to navigate. I think a lot of truths can be true at once. And I think she did inherit an overworked, understaffed sheriff's office. I think she is a woman leading a law enforcement office. And I think all of those things made her job very hard, have made her job extremely hard. And I'm sure there is plenty of truth to her experiences as a woman and the struggles that she has gone through with her personnel. I actually have no doubt about that. And so in that regard, I think she does present honestly. I do think your point of if you can be both a victim and the strength that a department needs to lead, I think that is a question to be answered by the judge and the board of supervisors. I would argue that maybe no, but I mean, that's not my decision, obviously. But I think all these truths can be occurring at the same time, you know.
Michelle, the other central figure in this case is, of course, her former chief of staff, Victor Aenlle. What did you think about his testimony, his role in this case? What's your perception of all that?
I think, yeah, is one of the most controversial figures in this entire saga. I feel I don't understand why. I think my biggest, and I don't know how to say that. My biggest thing from the is
these people don't make this easy for us.
No, it's not.
I want to make a point of giving both of you credit.
Yeah.
To try to walk a straight line down the middle on this stuff.
It's very hard to remain neutral. It's very hard to remain neutral in this sense. So, Anna's right in that, yeah, there are many truths to this. She did inherit a very, very this sheriff's department was not all, to her credit, she did hire a lot of people. She has, added a lot of programs. She's done, she's created a lot of jobs. She has done some interesting things within the department. I know that before her, during her candidacy, I had spoken to some of her opponents, and in the union, at that moment, I knew that it was not going to be easy for her. I knew at that moment it was going to be very hard. There were a lot of people within the department that already did not like her, and the community was out there supporting her, but within the sheriff's department, it was very tough. Now, at that time when we were covering it, I was at the Bolanos party, and my reporter was at her party, and the obviously the vibes were very different, and a lot of deputies were at his party, so you can see the difference. There was not a lot of support on that side, and there was so many different sheriff's deputies over there. So he had the backing. He had those people there. So she's not wrong in that sense that the sheriff's deputies were not supportive of her coming in. As far as there being, and I'm not dodging the question. I'm not, I swear. But it was going to be very difficult for her to come in. As to her decision, because they had told me that one of the reasons they didn't like her was because there had been a rumor that she was with this person. And they knew about that before her election. And that had been very interesting to me.
Anna, let me ask you, Anna, you sat through his testimony. We're talking about Victor Aenlle. He has clearly become the person that she really decided to rely on most heavily. I mean, the testimony I read, the testimony I sat through, it was clear that she chose to rely on him, maybe perhaps more than anybody else. Well, what was the impression you had of him? Was he impressive? Was he, what was he like?
This is where teetering the line, I think, comes into play. But I think it is safe to say, from my perspective, that he is very sure of himself. And I think he thinks that he has a lot of the abilities and strengths to lead a sheriff's office. There's no doubt in my mind that he is her most trusted confidant, regardless of her wishing to call him that or not. I think she relied on him more than anyone in the sheriff's office. I think she let herself trust one person instead of her staff. And that is where the conflict arises. His testimony is interesting. He's very sure of himself, and he holds himself in high regard. And that is completely contradictory to almost everyone else in the sheriff's office view of him. And I think that's that.
They went to some lengths at the hearing over and over again, really, to try and establish that there was a romantic relationship between the two of them. Now, I've written, it doesn't matter, because the nature of the relationship, she chose to rely on him either way. But did they make that case? And why, Anna, do you think it was so important to them to establish that specific component of it?
I think this is interesting because I think in the beginning they did try to present it as though there was some romantic, inappropriate relationship dynamic there. And that's been cause for concern, again, throughout this entire process. It's kind of the impetus for all of the public concern. I think it's interesting, though, by the end of the 10-day hearing, the county, I don't know if they took a relook at everything and felt that they needed to change their argument. They didn't change it fully, but they did step back on the argument that it was innately romantic or intimate in nature. They kind of were like, okay, maybe it wasn't necessarily, but it was a close enough friendship and close enough personal relationship with this person that it caused these concerns to be raised in the first place. And you have valued his support and his connection and his role in your office over that of the rest of your team. And so it was kind of interesting because I think there has been a step back away from the alleged boyfriend term that people use. I don't know if that's because they can't substantiate that further than he said, she said. And so it was kind of like a thrown away argument. But I think the point is still the same in that she basically handed the sheriff's office control and power and influence over to this person that she is close to, regardless of what exactly the extent of that relationship is.
Michelle, one of the interesting people I thought who testified was a former assistant to the sheriff, confidant, close friend of the sheriff's, and obviously their relationship has gone awry. Her name was Valerie Barnes. What was your reaction to her testimony? She went into more detail about this relationship than most of the
She was one of the people who was cited a lot in the Cordell report, and she came out later, having been named. It's interesting because I think that was a lot of what that was based on. So for her to come out and speak openly to talk about and bring up these allegations that Corpus had, is a little
well, she was the one who talked about
she was
Julie
talking about racism. She was the one talking about how there was some allegations of just hateful rhetoric, and that was and they did pull the Celebrite text messages, and they found that those were true, and they verified those texts with the homophobic slur, and they looked at all of that stuff, and and I think Corpus, obviously she said that all of that was fake, and but it was just, I think with her testimony, it just came out and it just showed that I think it was a powerful testimony that I think the judge and the board is going to have a very difficult time with, because how do you disprove that with the actual forensic evidence that they found? How are they going to read that and say, well, here is the evidence, here is the phone evidence, and this is obviously looks really bad. That was the biggest thing for me, especially in the Cordell report. But one of the things that for me stands out in the Cordell report is that they used her, but that's a different story.
One of the problems with this kind of controversy is that by the time it's over, no one covers themselves with glory. That it's just everybody ends up kind of wishing they had never gotten involved in this. So with that as a backdrop, Anna, is there anybody who testified in this hearing who you thought, wow, they're impressive? I thought they were very credible. I thought they were impressive. Was there anybody who sort of stood out in this hearing?
That's a good question. I think there were some key figures in there, right? Like Victor, Christina, Mike Callaghy, Carlos Tapia. but all of their testimonies were things that I personally have reported on before. I think it has been up there. So nothing was starkingly new, at least in terms of the arguments being presented. I think some of the behind the scenes folks, especially in the county, who work in payroll and HR, and I think those dynamics were really interesting in solidifying some of the timeline and the cases that were being presented from the county. And I know that there's a little bit of irony there with your employees testifying for the sake of the county's governing body, but I still think that there is some I think it helped strengthen a lot of the arguments about some of the efforts that county staff went through to help Corpus in the beginning, some of the emails that they had to send back and forth regarding time cards and promotions that were requested by sheriff for Victor. Those dynamics all really like solidified. And I guess that was more of the hard evidence rather than testimony. But I would say that Valerie Barnes' testimony was quite strong. She was in there pretty early on, and I think everyone is very aware that a lot of the allegation that there was some inappropriate relationship is completely based on her testimony. And so there is some consideration there about how trustworthy she is. But I mean, she presented very genuine. Everything is very consistent with what everybody else has said in terms of timeline. I think some of the staff that were alleged to be retaliated against within the sheriff's office, their testimony was quite strong and enticing, in my opinion. Yeah.
What kind of mess is going to be left? I mean, either way, if the sheriff remains in office, or somebody, she leaves and somebody has to come in and take over. Michelle, just from that larger perspective, how hard a job is that going to be to run this office after all it's been through?
Well, from what we understand is that if she is removed, they will appoint someone. But in the interim, from my understanding, it will be, Pereira, who's going to be the undersheriff, right? And until they appoint someone, which I haven't heard that they have someone in mind. I mean, I don't know if you know, Aenlle, whether they have somebody that they consider. At least they haven't mentioned anybody. Until the end of her term, and then we will have another election, from my understanding. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it will be a difficult job because of all of the, political, the intensity that is already in that office. We've already had Monks, we've had Bolanos, and now we have Corpus. This office is controversial. So we need another sheriff. We need somebody who is going to step up and whip it into shape. There is just, that is, we need somebody strong to be the leader, the top cop of this office. And that right now, is just asking a lot, especially with the, the whole, idea of this inspector general type committee that they're trying to put together, this civilian oversight. Is that happening? Do we already have something like that? But we don't have the independent inspector general. So we do need somebody who's going to whip it into shape.
Aenlle, let me ask you, retired Judge James Emerson presided over the hearings. How did he do? Were there any hints of kind of where he was coming from?
Yeah, I think this is interesting because I think maybe it felt clear to me what he was looking for. There was a lot of details and nuance about Carlos Tapia's arrest and time cards that hours were spent on debating. And he made it pretty clear that it was almost irrelevant to the case at hand, because that's a whole nother matter that I think will be, possibly in a future court of some sort. And so he was really trying to direct the arguments to be made about what exactly is at hand and what county charter violations Corpus allegedly has violated, I think that it was interesting. He was quite vocal about his kind of frustrations with particularly Corpus's legal team repeatedly throughout the trial hearing. And I thought that was interesting. I think there could be an argument made from her team, honestly, that he showed some level of frustration with them that could err on the side of bias. I'm not saying that they've made that claim, and I'm not saying that that's even true, but the way he spoke to their attorneys and the frustrations he kind of vocalized seemed to suggest something of that sort. I think this is an interesting situation that he was found himself in, because this has never been done before. And so everything is being made up along the way. There's not an exact, they're not searching for beyond level of doubt. It's just an evidentiary hearing. And so he was able to kind of navigate the conversation himself, which I think was interesting. I have no idea what he will say. I think that he did suggest that there's a lot to be considered here. They're over, even beyond the matter at hand, the precedent that it would set, I think he is weighing as well.
Michelle, you made reference to this when Christina Corpus was first elected. She and another sheriff elsewhere in California became the first two Latina sheriffs in the history of the state. She did come in with a lot of optimism and high expectations. Do you think, and I want to ask both of you this, but I'll start with you, Michelle, has it made it harder for the next Latino or Latina to win this seat, to hold on to this office?
I think there's a lot of things that are making it harder for another Latina to be a sheriff in this county and any county in the country. So that's the short answer. But I think that there's going to take a lot of the next person is going to have to prove themselves. We're going to need somebody who comes in and really, if they're of color, they're going to need to really step it up. I think at some point maybe it's possible. But from my understanding and my experience and my this county did change a lot over the last few years. There were a lot more people who voted red. I'm not sure how positive they would be or happy they would be, and it really depends on how convincing the next person of color comes in. We do need somebody strong. We need a strong leader. We need somebody who could really, but then again, we just had, for lack of a better phrasing, we had 3 deaths.
Okay, Anna, what about you? What's the political fallout for the next sheriff, especially if they try to appoint or somebody who runs it as a Latino or Latina?
Yeah, I think that it would be short-sighted and incorrect to assume that it doesn't have an impact. I think if I, in my reporting or just personally, can help the argument that Christina Corpus and her actions do not make it easier or harder for the next person to be elected and their success, I think the exact struggle that she has gone through in that office, regardless of her own choices and her leadership style, it's everyone else that will make it harder or easier for the next person. And I want to give her credit where credit is due, and that she can't completely change how the public sees or interacts with a sheriff of color, a Latino sheriff, a Latina sheriff. I don't want to suggest that her actions have made it impossible for another woman to ever be elected or another Latina to ever be elected. I think, unfortunately, maybe the public will respond in that way, but it is not because of her and her actions. And I mean, we will see, of course. I think it will be very, very, very hard for a woman to be elected in the position again and a Latina to be elected in the position again. And that is because of the things that go on in our day-to-day lives as a society. That is not because that she has possibly been removed as sheriff from this office, if that makes sense.
Michelle, in the end, this is all about a jury of 5 people who are going to make the ultimate decision. Do you get any sense from your reporting, from people that you've talked to, that any of the board members who've already voted 5-0 to remove the sheriff, that any minds were changed?
Listen, these board members have fought tooth and nail to get a measure passed. They have all voted. They've all wanted to do this. This was pushed by Ray Mueller and Noelia Corzo. They've all done this. They've there was not any. There wasn't a recall. There could have been. There wasn't. And for full disclosure, the Redwood City Pulse and the Almanac editors did call for Christina Corpus to resign. We asked for her resignation because we felt that her leadership was sort of a distraction to the county. We needed somebody who was a stronger leader. We thought that some of the things that she said per the investigations were hateful. We didn't need that kind of stuff in the county. That's very different than what we believe in Measure A, which is Measure A is a form of giving power to the government and having them remove her. To your question, these are 5 people who are trying hard to get rid of her. Now, they've already voted 5-0 to start these sheriff removal hearings. I don't see them changing their mind. I don't see them saying, hey, these hearings are something that are going to, what new evidence have been, aside from some of the people that have spoke, I don't see any new evidence that they could find that is going to, this has all been presented before in any of the other reports that we've had, even, when you have a report that's, called, lies, secrecy, intimidation. You've already set the tone for what you think this is going to be. So I think that's, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've jaded.
Anna, do you have any sense of that question?
I think it will be very interesting what Judge Emerson decides. I think as a judge, I think he is weighing the precedent that this sets. And I think he is weighing all of that on top of everything else. And if he recommends that they don't remove her, then I would be surprised, I think, actually, if the board continued to move forward with everything. There is a level of momentum here that I think they are trying to ride on a little bit. But there are other factors going on. There's going to be the civil grand jury, which is a historically supported method of removing an elected official. And it's very hard to argue against that. There's also anything that she may get criminally charged for. This is not ending anytime soon. And so if the board does not pass through the Measure A proceedings, I think there are many other ways in which that she could be removed still.
Anna Mata of the San Mateo Daily Journal, Michelle Iracheta of the Redwood City Pulse, thank you both for taking time to be with us today. Bob and I are going to make a few comments, and you're probably going to want to clear out before we do that. But thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure, because this story, as you said, Anna, I'd be surprised if we're halfway through this thing.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Good
All right,
job,
bye.
guys. Bye.
Bob, Michelle referenced recall. And one of the reasons I wanted us to have this little conversation is, given your background as a political consultant and strategist, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. A recall, gathering the signatures, was going to cost $500,000. Nobody was in a position to step forward and spend that kind of money.
Yeah. And I think that, the charter amendments seem to be this great opportunity to do this cleanly, quickly, and to move on. But you're talking about an unprecedented situation, and the way it's evolved over time, I think probably there are many people that wish they had gone the route of the recall.
Well, the trouble with that, though, is there's no guarantee that we're going to succeed at even getting it on the ballot.
Right.
It's one of the few county-wide offices left, and the sheer volume of work that it would take and the money it would cost, there was no particular interest. I mean, the Deputy Sheriff's Association was interested in this, but they're not major players in the political scene like the Central Labor Council is, or the plumbers, or the engineers, people like that. So they weren't situated where they could do this. Now, they did well raising money for the Measure A campaign.
Right.
But as you know, that's a different ask than let's do something that may never work out. So, it's easy to say, I wish we'd gone the recall route, and I guess it would be cleaner. But I think one of the concerns that Ray Mueller had, who proposed this Measure A, is that there was no guarantee they were going to succeed at it.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not condemning the board at all. Given this situation where they were, the charter amendment looked awfully appealing to them, and for all the reasons that you talked about in terms of a recall. But there's something about this process, maybe it's because it's never been done before, that I think, concerns me a little bit. It's almost like you had a jury, you chose a jury, and that jury before the trial convicted the defendant. Then you go ahead and have the trial, and in the end, the same jury's voting to convict the defendant. I don't know how that's going to play in the courts.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to be at all. Maybe it's because the judge is the one who's making the recommendation. But it just feels like this process was much larger, much grander than perhaps it appeared at the beginning.
Well, yeah, and certainly, I'm not sure anybody thought it was going to just simply take this much time and wear on everybody the way it has. And of course, there are multiple lawsuits flying back and forth. There are estimates that the county has already spent well over $20 million providing legal assistance to Corpus, because as a county elected official, she's entitled to have those bills paid. The recall, I guess it would have been nice, but that doesn't mean it was something that was going to be done. The other question is, what kind of mess is left behind? I mentioned the Deputy Sheriff's Association was not a major player, but they are now. And they may feel empowered by this to be much more difficult for the next sheriff than they were for this one. There's always that, you always fight the next war based on how you did in the last one. And I wouldn't be surprised if they think they need to be much tougher with the sheriff than they were going in with this sheriff.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be the case. Clearly, what the people of the county need is someone who can come in, kind of reestablish clear lines within the department, and can rebuild relationships with people. One of the sad parts of this is the sheriff's department lost management, deputies, civilian employees, good quality people because of this. They were either fired or intimidated or just got tired of the toxic environment. So there are a lot of costs that this has brought on. I hope that they can, that somehow someone emerges that can bring this department kind of back to center, if it ever was at
Well,
center.
that's the thing is it's an interesting thing because we elect the equivalent of a police chief. Every other police chief in California is appointed by a city council.
Right.
This is the only elective law enforcement office other than the attorney general. So it's essentially inviting someone to view the job in a political context. That was some of what got Bolanos in trouble, taking care of friends. There were always rumors that he was giving concealed carry weapon carry permits to his friends. So there's always that sort of sense of untidiness swirling around it. Don Horsley, I think, was generally regarded as someone who really reformed the office, but he was also a very good politician. He knew how to do that. So it always seems to invite it. I guess it invites the question about maybe it's time for us to stop electing sheriffs, but I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon.
Sounds like a good topic for another time.
Yeah. So I think that's enough for me. Well, you got anything else you want to add, Bob?
No, that's
Well,
good.
this has been yet another edition of the game. I should say, for the sake of the permanent record, and thank you, Frank, for reminding me, we have invited Sheriff Corpus and Victor Aenlle to come onto the show countless times. And in fact, they have often said, yes, I'll come on. Let me get a date and get back to you. And then the date never materializes. We would have loved to have had the chance to let her tell her side of the story. And yeah, confront her a little bit with some of the other facts, but we would have provided her a fair forum in which she could express her views on these things. So that being said, I'm still Mark Simon.
And I'm still Bob Marks.
And this is still the game. Thanks for watching us. You can find us anywhere on YouTube or any number of places. As you've seen on the screen, go to thegamepeninsula.com, and you can watch this again if you're so inclined. Thanks for being with us.